I'm very excited to be here. I hope everyone had a great lunch. My name is Matt Hippely. I'm a user interface engineer. I work on the Angular components for the Clarity design system. VMware uses that to power its web applications. And
good afternoon. My name is Jeeyun. I'm also a UI engineer at VMware. And today we'll be talking about how we can leverage the power of Angular CLI and schematics to reduce boilerplate in your code so you can focus on writing your application instead of spending hours maintaining and upgrading your application.
So let's take a minute and tell everyone a little bit about Clarity, what it is, what you can use it for, and how a design system is something they might be interested for their own enterprise applications.
Yeah, so as we have said earlier, we are at VMware, and really Clarity was born out of a need that we had internally. So we have over 70 external-facing applications and many more internal applications. And what we found out was that throughout company, many of the developers across teams were wasting effort re-implementing and reinventing the wheel over and over again. And our applications across product suites lacked consistency. So out of it came our design system. And what we provide out of the box is UX guidelines that our designers can use to create high-fidelity mock-ups using a industry tool called Sketch to produce mock-ups that you can then use to communicate with the engineers. And we also provide the HTML, CSS, and of course, Angular components that are enterprise-ready, that are tested for accessibility, as well as full support for internationalization and localization.
Okay. It sounds like we're ready to get started. So I'm trying to create a new web application. And there's so many things to do. It can be kind of overwhelming, can't it? I have to choose a framework, figure out which one is the best for my needs and my product. Then I have to set up a build system and choose the right one for the application we're going to build. The third thing we have to do is choose a router and other components that make the application function the way we want it to. And finally, I'm going to have to look at all of the frameworks out there that give style and beauty to our application and figure out which one will work well with us. It's so overwhelming.
Yeah, tell me about it. I remember having to spend over a week just setting up my application even before I can start adding my own code. But what's nice about using frameworks like Angular is that it's very opinionated, but it's well tested and provides a good baseline for you to be able to do your application development very, very well. And Angular is really well suited for not just web, but also for mobile web development, native mobile, and also native desktop application development. So schematics is what we will talk about mostly today. And it was developed by the Angular CLI team. And what it does is it provides custom scaffolding for your Angular application. In a nutshell, it's a transformation pipeline that can generate and modify code for you in the file system.
So that sounds a little dangerous. I'm a little worried about what will happen to my application if you're modifying my files. What if something goes wrong?
No worries. The nice thing about schematics is that all of your changes happen first in memory and is staged. So if an error occurs during your transformation, then nothing is committed and the file system is left untouched.
Okay, can you tell me a little more?
Absolutely. So in essence, in schematics, the file system is represented as a tree. And the schematic scripts will apply a series of actions that are called rules to the code in the tree.
Okay, so it sounds like schematics is a script that runs and parses files, the code in my files for my project, and modifies it in memory. Then what happens?
Right. And then, if there are no errors, then the changes are committed and then your file system is changed.
Okay, that sounds pretty useful. If I can have somebody transform my code when they're using schematics, can you tell me a little about what this could be used for? How is it useful for a general project?
Yeah, schematics can be used for a lot of different things. So with schematics, you can create new files, you can modify them, you can delete them, and you can move files. So really, it's essentially used for anything in which you need to, for example, scan your file and code base and do anything with your code.
Well, that sounds good. It might be complicated, though, so maybe you can take me through the pieces that make up a schematic and show me what it looks like.
Yeah, writing schematics on your own is actually pretty simple.
Let me guess. I have to use npm to install something that lets me write schematics.
That's right. So schematics has its own CLI. So you can run it by first globally installing the schematic CLI. Then all it takes is one command to generate a blank schematics project. And this command will auto-generate all the files you need to write your first schematic.
So install schematics and then run the schematics command. I got it.
That's correct.
Let's see what's next.
So as I mentioned earlier, schematic is a function that takes in a tree, changes the tree, and then returns it.
Okay, let me see if I understand this correctly. You're telling me I have to write a function that takes the tree, and I execute this script like any other script on the command line. So where the arrow points on the screen, if I run that, or if I write that piece of code, can you tell me what it will do?
Yep. So if you run the schematics with the file that you have just changed, basically this will, in this case, create a file with the name that you have passed in running the script, and then the content of the file will simply say, hello world.
Well, that's a good start. It's simple and something I might be able to build on when I figure out what I want to do with it. So I'm excited. It seems like schematics would be a good thing for me to learn how to integrate into my projects. Will you walk me through some of the simple use cases that use schematics so that I can see what it would look like in a real project?
Sure. Actually, we have been talking about the Angular CLI, and the CLI internally also uses schematics to generate its code. So let's go through a scenario of going from nothing to having a running application by running some CLI commands and without having to write any code.
Okay, so you're telling me we're going to look at some commands, and the first thing I have to do after I install the Angular Schematics tool is to generate a new project.
That's correct. And even adding things like clarity into this project is very simple. Just one line to say ng add CLR Angular.
Well, why would I want to add clarity to my application with schematics when I already know how to manually add it into my project?
Sure. You can, of course, manually add it, but running this command will configure the modules and all the necessary files and put them in the places where your Angular application expects it. So with this, you already have a running application with clarity added into it.
I see. Well, that makes sense, and that's very useful. Okay, let's look at what actually changes when I run the ng-add@clr command.
Right, so without having to even read our documentation, you can see that just adding clarity this way, it added a couple of style sheets, and then added JavaScript files that it would need for the Angular application to run correctly. And then there's one more thing.
Let me guess. It will modify my application module for me?
That's right. So Angular applications with Clarity would require 2 additional modules in it. The Clarity module and the browser animation module have been automatically added for you.
Well, I like that. It's useful to me as an engineer building my product because then I can get back and focus on building my product and not worrying about configuring Clarity.
Right. So in this example, all I did was I took the basic layout from our documentation, and by doing this, I already get a fully running application ready for you to add any logic and put the more interesting part of the code into it.
I see. So I haven't written any code, and you've given me a way to quickly start a new application, add Clarity, and then use your documentation to have an application that has a header, a side nav, and a container for my application content?
That's right. It's ready for you.
That's awesome. Now, I want to step back a minute because I remember that you said that Schematics is used to generate files for a new component.
Right. So notice that when you run the generate command from the Angular CLI, it'll auto-generate a folder and all the necessary files for the component.
I see. I also noticed that in the declarations array for my module, it updated the app module with the new component declaration.
Yep.
Well, that's good. So that seems like a good overview of the basic use cases. However, we don't just start new projects at my company. We have a lot of different products that use Angular already, and most of them use Clarity. One of the things I wish I didn't have to spend so much time on is updating and migrating our apps to keep up to date with Clarity, because Clarity changes pretty regularly, and that takes time away from the new features. Can you tell me a little bit about something that might help me with that?
Sure. Schematics is perfect for upgrading, whether it be upgrading the version of Angular, or in this case, upgrading the version of the library that you're adding on top of Angular. So it's very easy to update the Clarity version of your application automatically. You can run ngupdate at CLR Angular, and this will go through your code base and update your code to use the latest version of Clarity.
Okay, I know I said this before, but having somebody else modify or make changes to my project concerns me a little bit. What if something goes wrong during the update? How do I know what your script is doing to my application? And what if I need to take actions?
Yeah, actually, let's take an application and run the update command and see what happens.
All right, well, let me give you an example of an application I'm working on today. This is a simple application that I've started with a sign-up form, and it uses the Clarity wizard to take the user through the sign-up process. Now, this app is on Clarity version 11.34, which is the last version of 11, and I need to update it to Clarity 1.0. How will the Clarity schematic let me know what it's doing when I upgrade my application?
So when we run the ngupdate command, the schematic will print out messages and let you know what is happening to your code base.
Okay, so looking at the results, I see that the schematic changed some names. Before we ran it, my view child was wizard or wizard page, and after I ran it, it added the CLR prefix to it. Can you tell me what happened there?
Sure. So with the newest version of Clarity, we changed some of the class names, and rather than making our consumers go and manually update them, we changed those class names for you.
I see. So I didn't see any messages here, though. It just modified the files in my project. What
That's
else
right.
did it do?
So in this case, we actually have an attribute CLR type that we have deprecated. So in the newest version of Clarity, we're not using that anymore. So you will get a warning in the console saying that it has been deprecated. Now we made sure that it was user-friendly so it wouldn't actually break, but it's still nice to give a warning so that in the future update, when they have time, they can remove that from their code.
Well, I appreciate that. It's nice to know where to focus my attention. What else is there in your schematic?
Yep. This was an example of our icon packages kind of moving things around in different sets. So in this case, we also get an informational message saying that the icon that you are using in your application may need further attention.
I see. That makes sense, and that sounds useful. So what if the Clarity schematic looks at my code and evaluates it and finds a problem, but it can't actually fix that problem? What happens?
Sure. Sometimes things like that could happen too. Maybe the schematic cannot tell automatically what to do, but it can still find that you have deprecated code in your application. So we will inform you of the file and the sections of your code that you need to maybe check, along with useful information like links to our release note in which that particular change has taken place.
I see. Well, I don't like reading release notes. It is a necessary evil. This is really great for my team. It seems like schematics and the Angular CLI really help me focus on building my application instead of spending my time building boilerplate and updating my dependencies to keep my application current.
Right, you are. The Angular CLI and schematics work together to help us engineers to focus on building and writing complicated logic rather than spending our time maintaining our application, upgrading the versions of Angular and Clarity and other kinds of things.
That's right. It seems like there's some other things we might be able to do with schematics. I'm curious, could I write my own schematics to do something like forcing a coding convention across my application or a suite of applications?
Exactly. You could enforce a specific structure for your application or use schematics to configure environments that could be used across multiple applications.
So you mean like production or development environments that multiple apps might need to use the same way?
Yep.
I see. That's great. Well, thank you for helping me understand a little bit about how schematics is useful to improving the developer experience on a large team. I hope that everyone here can take a little bit away from the information about how schematics can be used in their own projects.
And yes, if you are interested to learn more about Clarity Design, you can find more information at clarity.design. Or if you want to have access to the slides that you see here today, we have it uploaded on GitHub as well, so you can check it out for code examples and more. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope that was useful.